Welcome back, class. We've had some trying times the last few weeks, but we will get through it. As you know, this class will now be conducted entirely online. My plan is to provide you with video lectures like this one to maintain as much as possible the previous format, so let's get started. Today, we will focus on Chapter 10, Motivation and Emotion, and look at some highlights from Chapter 9, Lifespan Development. Remember, you should write a summary of a topic from one of the videos from Chapter 9 as part of the course requirements. So let's go ahead and start now. Motivation and emotion. We'll examine such things as definition and examples, look at extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, examine instincts, drive reduction, the role of hunger, weight issues, and preferences and tastes. We'll also examine real briefly eating behavior and eating behavior disorders, as well as briefly examine sexual behavior, optimal arousal, and needs. Then we'll look at emotions, the second part of this chapter, looking at the theories of emotions, expressing and recognizing emotions, and the role of facial feedback. Then we'll look real briefly at some of the key items from Lifespan Development, Chapter 9, issues in developmental psychology, prenatal development and the newborn, motor development, cognitive development, and social development. Motivation. We'll look a little bit more closely at emotions a little bit later, but just to give you a little bit of a highlight, emotions can change in an instant, especially in response to an unexpected event. Surprise, fear, anger, and sadness are some immediate emotions that come to mind after certain events like the Boston Marathon bombing that happened in 2013. We'll later be examining what these emotions are, what causes them, and what then motivated some bystanders to help out. So let's look now at motivation. Motivation is a need or desire that energizes behavior and directs it towards a goal. For example, Aaron Ralston found the motivation to cut off his arm when he was trapped on a cliff in Utah in 2003. A very difficult thing one to be able to do, and obviously you had to be extraordinarily motivated in order to accomplish that task. So what motivated him to do this? Was it hunger, the drive to survive, the drive to reproduce? Probably in some regards, probably a little bit of all of those types of things. But again, you can imagine what type of motivation is required in order to remove your body part in order to survive as a whole organism. So let's look at the types of motivation. We have intrinsic motivation, which comes from within. We have extrinsic motivation, which comes from outside. So the idea here with intrinsic motivation, the thing that energizes and directs your behavior is an internal thing based on your own autonomy, your self-reliance, your mastery, your sense of purpose. Whereas extrinsic motivation is coming from the outside. This is meaning that you were paid to do it, you were compensated, or you were afraid to get punished if you didn't do something. So those are the two key different types of motivation. Something from the inside, intrinsic, and something from the outside, extrinsic. So basically the idea here, the rule of thumb, is things that truly matter, it's good to have an intrinsic motivation for it. Now let's look at another aspect of it. Research suggests that when something we love to do, like icing cakes, becomes our job, our intrinsic and extrinsic motivations may change. For example, if you love doing something just for the joy of doing it, and then all of a sudden you are paid to do that thing that you love, you're going to start to believe that why you do this thing is because you get paid to. Extrinsic motivation, as opposed to previously when it was intrinsic. The problem with that, you may start to not love that thing that you did enjoy so much because now it's something that's getting paid for. And obviously, if you are getting someone used to getting paid for something, the extrinsic reward, extrinsic motivation, then when you stop getting that money for it or the reward for it, then that behavior loses some of its light and you may not want to do it anymore. Now, theories of motivation. William James proposed some time ago the instinct theory of motivation, asserting that behavior is driven by instincts. And a lot of our behavior, especially when we are newborn babies, is going to be instinctual. It's probably one of the reasons that we've survived as a species, because we have certain instincts that allow us rapidly to be able to feed ourselves. So in humans, instincts may include behaviors such as an infant's rooting for a nipple and sucking reflexes. Now imagine, if you would, a long time ago, when we were just developing as a species, if certain babies did not have these instincts or characteristic behaviors in them, they probably would have found it more difficult in order to survive. The ones who had these characteristics, they more easily survived, had offspring that had these characteristics, and so on and so forth. So, do instincts direct human behavior? Well, again, an instinct is a fixed, rigid, and predictable pattern of behavior. Okay? It is not acquired by learning and is likely to be rooted in genes, okay, in the body. So what it comes down to is that these instincts are something that becomes hard-coded in the body, allowing us to come into the world pre-packaged with certain types of strict type of behavior protocols, which makes us more likely to survive. Now, for humans, we don't find it as rigid and constrained as other animals may have instincts. For example, for humans, we may have nesting behavior. When you're of a certain age, you get married, you have a good job, you start to think about having a family, you may move into a house, start making the preparations for the house for the new child. This human nesting behavior is not going to be something that we are dictated to do by our DNA. Most likely, some of the factors involved in it will be things like a social clock, outside factors, cultural factors that will play a role into what we're supposed to do. Unlike the instinctual nesting that we see with birds. For them, it is something that is programmed in them, that it's part of their DNA, and their behavior is going to be very much more rigid when it comes to these instincts. Instincts in evolutionary perspective. Other species have genetically programmed instincts motivating their behavior, but do humans? Human babies, as I stated, show certain reflexes, but in general our behavior is less prescribed by genetics than are other animals. We seem to have a lot more flexibility. We may, however, have general patterns of behavior which can be explained as emerging through natural selection. So again, natural selection is a major factor in evolution, meaning that there are certain characteristics that an organism may possess that allows them to survive, to be old enough to have offspring, and those offsprings will also share those particular characteristics. And in that way, we start to see the world start to change and evolve, such that mostly we all have those characteristics now. They become, quote, instinctual. Instinct theory has given way to evolutionary theory in explaining human behavior. So the idea here is that we can look to see that we evolve, and this evolution based on things like natural selection can start to explain certain types of behaviors in human beings. Drive reduction. A drive is an aroused tense state related to a physical need such as hunger or thirst. Drive reduction theory refers to the idea that humans are motivated to reduce these drives, such as eating to reduce the feeling of hunger or drinking to reduce the feeling of thirst. This then restores a homeostasis, a balance, a steady internal state within the organism. So here we have a need, food or water for example. That's a physiological need that then gives rise to a drive, a psychological sense of hunger or thirst. It's usually going to be quite uncomfortable, which then will motivate us to do something about it. And that leads to us performing drive reducing behaviors, eating if we are hungry, drinking if we are thirsty. This now takes us to hunger. Hunger and subsequent eating are the result of complex physiological processes that maintain this homeostasis, this balance that we just talked about. So hunger is body chemistry and brain control. Cultural and situational factors also affect our hunger. And then there are issues of obesity and weight control. There are challenges for many. Physiology, social factors, and food and activity factors all play a significant role in how we deal with hunger, how hunger drives us and motivates us, and the outcomes of our hunger, and things like being able to control our body weight. Hunger even changes our motives as we plan for the future. Men whose food intake had been cut in half become obsessed with food. Imagine if you would, you hadn't eaten this morning and you hadn't eaten last night for dinner. Then every time somebody walks out in the hallway with a bag of food while you're in class during lunchtime, you're going to hear it. You're going to focus on it, and it becomes a major thing for you. We sort of become sort of mini obsessed with the idea of food, and you see this all the time. Now, let's look real quickly at the physiology of hunger before we take a short break. Experiments and other investigations show a complex relationship among the stomach, hormones, and different parts of the brain. Feeling hungry can include the stomach contractions, like the grumbly stomach that we are very familiar with. The feeling can happen even if the stomach is removed or filled with a balloon. So what it comes down to, we don't require to have a stomach that's empty for us to sense and feel hunger. It comes from other factors. There are many ways in which we detect a sense of hunger in our body, and that's a key factor that we'll be examining as we go through these slides. Receptors in the digestive tract monitor things like glucose level and send signals to the hypothalamus in the brain so that we can be kept up to date when it comes to our hunger. The hypothalamus then can send out appetite stimulating hormones to tell the body it's time to eat. We'll stop there and prepare for the next session.